Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest Zoominar. It's great to have so many of you here. I think we're up to 83 participants in the group already, and as always, that creeps up as the first few minutes past 10 o'clock creep by in traditional Church of Scotland fashion, as people creep in the door. It's wonderful that we've all come together to hear a very important subject, which is particularly important to many of us, I imagine. As we are entering into the 14th week, I think, of lockdown, the 3.5 months in, and I imagine many of us are starting to feel that, if we haven't felt it for quite some time. Before we go into today's Zoominar, which we will be recording, and there'll be a recording of the presentation from Gabby later on. We're going to be still for a while, and Elizabeth is going to lead us in a moment of prayer. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Some familiar words then from Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. So let's bring our prayers to the God who knows us completely. Let's pray together. Creator God, in this time and in this space, we bring our very selves. You created each one of us. You know our inner thoughts. You know our fears, our hopes, our dreams. You have called us to be preachers of your word, pastors to your flock, prophetic voices in this world's noisy clamour, and we're pleased to respond to the call that you have placed on our lives. In this time of world crisis, in these weeks of unrest and disharmony, in these days of sadness and sorrow, we are grateful that we have a God of love, peace and hope as we respond to the challenges of the day. But it can come at a cost. Long days with little restful sleep, long weeks of supporting fragile people, long months of feeling isolated or distant from the people we serve. We are reminded that your guidance, comfort and strength is there for us always. So be with us now as we gather here together in support of each other with our own experiences to share. Bless each one of us in this moment and in this day. And we ask it in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's one of those, I think, having now been involved in a lot of these Zoominars, since having been made one of the moderators of the Ministers' Discussion Forum, I didn't know what I was signing up for, to take on tech support for all of these different Zoom chats. But I think that it's something that many of us have been doing over these last few months, whether it be Zoom worship, holding Zoom virtual coffee mornings, book studies, Bible studies, lots and lots of different things. And I think we don't realise just how, as time progresses, that these take so much of our energy and our concentration. And as we approach 3.5 months of Zooming, I think the new term is that we're now, a lot of us are zoomed out. The reason why I said that I would be happy to open up today was because I know that I need this more than ever. And I'm not good at taking care of myself. And people have for years said, oh, you're your own worst enemy. You don't take care of yourself. You need to take more time out to do this, that, and the next thing. And so I thought it was important to be honest and to share that with my colleagues, and to say that I'm delighted that Gabby has been able to come here to give some of her time to show her support to us and to give us some help in thinking about how we can care for ourselves at this time, and indeed at any time in our ministry. Gabby is the Pastoral Support Manager for the Church of Scotland, and we're delighted to welcome her here today, and very grateful to her for the time that she's sharing with us. And we really look forward to hearing what you've got to say for us this morning. Gabby, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Before I start with the presentation, I just want to be completely upfront and say that I am coming from a position of Pastoral Support Manager, but I am not a minister, and I don't pretend to know or understand the experience of being on the front line in ministry. I just don't, because I've never been in that position. And so I want to put that out there, that as much as anything today, I would love to hear feedback from yourselves and from the breakout room discussions, or feedback afterwards from yourselves about what would be most useful in terms of support, and any areas that I haven't looked at which would be more relevant for you. So I just want to come out and say that. I often say to people when I'm introducing myself that I grew up in a man's family. My father was a minister, and so I have a perspective, one perspective as a child who's seen a workaholic father and in the ministry all my life. And what I told myself as a child, and what I told my father regularly, is I will never be in ministry. I'll never do that. And now I find myself working for the Church of Scotland, a bit humbled by my my cockiness back then. But my background, just briefly, was in family law. I was a family law solicitor, and then I did a master's in psychotherapy and wanted to go more into the caring for people before things completely broke down. I wanted to be supporting people before families broke down and children were put into adoption or foster care. And that's probably a lot of what's brought me into this role as well, that I've wanted to support people in ministry before they break down, before they burn out, before they get to the point of feeling really quite damaged. So that's my position, and that's where I come from. So today I've been asked to chat to you about how we care for ourselves during this challenging time. Also want to acknowledge that we are, is it 3.5 months in? We're in now? Yeah. And so there is the natural, what I have been noticing from the people I've been speaking to on a daily basis is a general sense of exhaustion, where at first a lot of us responded with a fair bit of adrenaline, a fair bit of, wow, there's this, we need to react, we need to respond, we need to sort things out. Some people found that more energizing than others. But I think all of us have kind of come off. You can't remain on that high level of adrenaline forever. And I think there comes a point where our bodies, even if our minds, our bodies reminding us, I'm exhausted. And actually, I don't want to see another screen full of faces, and I don't want to have another a Zoom meeting or online discussion about things. So again, I think we are all in a challenging stage of this process. And so just acknowledging that from the outset. I want to share my screen with you now, where I have a few slides, but I'm not going to talk at you the whole time. We will be breaking up to have discussion groups. So let me just see if I can share my screen. Here we go. Is that up for folks? People can see that? Yes, great. I just want to start by acknowledging, when we talk about well-being or our well-being, what do we mean? And I'm sure it means slightly different things for everyone, but a kind of generic description of well-being is the experience of health and happiness. It includes having good mental health, high life satisfaction, sense of meaning or purpose, and an ability to manage stress. And it's important to acknowledge that our sense of well-being can change from day to day. I know that for me personally, at this stage of my life, if my children sleep through the night, my sense of well-being the next day is going to be a lot higher, and my ability to manage stress. And I'm sure for yourselves, you know, this can change regularly depending on the demands, the amount of funerals you have, or conversations, or difficulties with session, or whatever. It's a constantly dynamic process. So just because we're feeling relatively well one week doesn't necessarily mean that will be the same the next day. But that's what I'm talking about when I say well-being. I should also say at this point, this PowerPoint will be made available to each of you, so if you'd find it helpful. Professionals say that in order to achieve well-being, we need to have a sense of individual vitality. So aliveness, vitality means feeling of being alive, to undertake activities which are meaningful, engaging, and which make us feel competent and autonomous. We also need a stock of resources, inner resources, to help us when things go wrong, so that we can be resilient to changes beyond our immediate control. And I think for a lot of us, we will realize how much we've needed these inner resources over the last few months when things have been completely out of our control. Oops, sorry here, folks. Just trying to see the bottom of my screen there. We also need a sense of relatedness to other people, which probably at the moment for many of us, we're relating to people more than ever in some ways, but in a very artificial way a lot of the time because it's online and behind a screen, which can be quite exhausting as well. Now, I want to acknowledge that well before this pandemic and well before COVID, I think many people in ministry that I spoke to were struggling at times with the activities that they were undertaking, often feeling like they weren't always that meaningful, you know, that they weren't always that engaging. People were feeling a sense of, do I need to keep doing things exactly the same way? And is this making me feel competent and autonomous? The challenge of ministers or people in ministry working really hard and really long hours and yet seeing churches continue to decline and Sunday worship continuing to become smaller, which is not always the case, but often. So for some people, I have seen a real burst of energy through this time because they've maybe felt that what they've been able to do is more meaningful and more engaging. They've had more people connecting online. They've been able to connect more effectively with people in their communities or with other community groups. There's been more teamwork. So it's important to acknowledge that amongst the challenges and difficulties of this time, real positive things have come up. But again, often at a cost to individual people in ministry because of the amount of energy that they've had to draw on to step up and to do things differently. So just before we go into our first kind of breakout, I just want to acknowledge some of the challenges to well-being that COVID has brought for all of us. And again, these are the things that I'm sure you've known and experienced, but sometimes just stating them is important. So I think as leaders during this time, there is a requirement on you to be a non-anxious presence for people during a time of real heightened fear and uncertainty. I know I personally have found that. I had my own anxieties at the beginning of this time with my family in Australia, and all of a sudden being told I couldn't travel to Australia even if I wanted to. And I was managing my own anxiety about my parents' inability to self-isolate and to follow any set of rules. And I thought, if they get sick and I'm not going to be able to get to them. And at the same time as that, speaking to ministers or people in ministry on a daily basis about their anxiety, that pressure of having to manage my own and hold other people's. I think it's important for you all to acknowledge people, even again before this, people expect you as ministers to hold their fears, their anxieties, their griefs, their sorry, I've got a call coming in on Teams, which I'm going to shut off. The things that concern them, they want you to hold them. And at the same time, at this time especially, you're having to hold all your own fears and anxieties. And that's exhausting. It's really exhausting to do that. So how do we stay well while looking after ourselves and other people? There's also been a whole new pressure on you to be creative, or a requirement to be creative. You have to do things differently. You have to think about, well, how can I connect with my congregation in way for the people that are online and who aren't? How do I be what my community want me to be? How can we serve our community? I mean, huge requirement to think outside the box, which again can be both empowering and energizing, but also exhausting. There's been a requirement to stay connected with your people. And I know, again, what I'm hearing a lot is that ministers have been saying to me, I just feel like I can't ever not answer my phone because they know I'm at home. So I don't have any excuse. They know I'm not out and about, or and it's this sense of is it okay to be like, no, I just can't take any more calls today. I just can't do this. And the guilt that goes along when you see the name come up on your phone and you decide to reject it. All of that can be quite exhausting. Maybe you don't reject it. Sometimes I do. And also the additional, pastoral care requirements that have come up, the additional deaths and sickness and fears, all of those things, massively challenging to maintaining a level of well-being. I think another really, and this is not an exhaustive list, I'm just highlighting a few that you'll know, trying to maintain your own healthy practices during this time when actually almost every option, especially for those few months, was removed from us. We couldn't leave the house, or for yourselves, the men's, a lot other than essential business. You can't go and play golf or sport or go to the gym or get to a coffee shop with a good book or have your holiday. I mean, in our brief conversation at the beginning of this meeting this morning, I was hearing about holidays that were cancelled, things that we look forward to that keep us going, things that we think it's okay, I can manage this because in a few short weeks, I'm going to be getting on a plane and flying away. And that's all been taken away from us. Also, maybe the people that you would go to speak to in person that would refresh you, we've been kind of isolated from them, certainly in person anyway. So there's been huge challenges which COVID have brought to our well-being. And again, I want to acknowledge that for some of us, at first we probably didn't notice those because we're running on the adrenaline of the creativity and the response and and being energized by all of a sudden we can do something different and we can do something new and this is exciting and I feel good about this. I feel good that I can step up and make a difference. But I think as that energy and that level of adrenaline settles down, a lot of us are being hit with, I'm exhausted. I can't actually string a sentence together anymore. And I'm feeling the cost of this on myself. And what I want to say to you today, over and above anything else, is I want you to notice how you're feeling. I want you to stop today and think, listen to yourself. How am I feeling? What is my body telling me about what's going on? Okay, what is my mind and my concentration and my thought patterns? What is my sleep patterns telling me about what is happening to me internally in my well-being? Because you're the only person really who can respond to that at the moment. We will look at ways that we can support you in it. So the first breakout room, I'll stop and give you a rest from listening to me, is that I'd like you to go into groups and discuss this question. If you had to rate your personal well-being right now on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being low and 10 being high, what would you say? And I'd also like you to think about what would your friends or family rate you the same as you're rating yourself. Okay, it might be useful for you later on to ask a friend or family member, what do you think about how I'm doing just now, and see what they have to say, because sometimes it can be quite enlightening. So if we could just break off into groups for a few minutes. Obviously, I should say at the outset of this that it goes without saying anything said in these groups is confidential. Don't expect you to come back and share wider about. Is everyone back in? Yeah? Good to go? Good. I hope that was a useful discussion. And what I want to encourage you to do is to remember and think about what you rated yourself as, and maybe even take a note of it somewhere and monitor that and see if it's not as high as what you know it should be. Then remember to be reflecting back often, how would I rate my well-being, and am I actively doing things to improve the rating I gave myself? And if it is quite high, then what am I doing to keep it high? Being proactive about it, especially at the moment, is really important. And remember to ask your family and friends, or if you live with somebody that knows you well, if you have a child in the house, maybe ask them what they think, and it might be quite interesting to hear what they have to say as well. Just again, not because I think any of you don't know this, but again, just to normalize some of what might be happening for us, I want to spend a little bit of time just thinking about stress, which obviously originally comes from the word distress. So when we're feeling distress and anxiety, research in the UK shows now that stress contributes to 90% of all diseases. So it is a huge health issue. And more than half of all visits to GPs are stress related. And stress obviously is the emotional and physical reaction we have to any kind of demand or pressure put on us. So again, I want to acknowledge that it would be unusual for you not to have been experiencing some level of stress or distress during this time, because significant demand and pressure has been put on all of us, both professionally in the roles or in our ministries, but also for most of us in our personal family lives. COVID anxiety in particular, anxiety related to the pandemic that we have been living through, just to again acknowledge there's been an enormous loss of security and safety at a very basic level. I mean, I know for all of us living in Scotland, it's a fairly safe, generally, environment. We've taken for granted that we can go into the world and we'll be safe and that we're not going to significantly harm anybody else. And for the first time, I know in my life, I've had to think it's not safe for me to go outside of my house for a period of time there, or it's not safe for me to see vulnerable people that I love or care about because I could make them sick. I could cause them to die. That's huge anxiety that we're carrying. And for those of you in ministry who have been involved in supporting, I'm sure, a lot of people in the vulnerable categories with underlying health conditions or the over 70s, you know, this has led to huge increase in anxiety and trepidation. And in some ways it's been contained, or it was contained when we were told really clearly, stay home, don't go out, everything has to be socially distanced and removed. But now all of a sudden the government are changing that quite significantly. And down in England, you know, places of worship are able to open, and we're asking lots of questions in the Church of Scotland about opening buildings, increasing numbers at funerals or weddings. This is going to bring significant anxiety. What happens if we open a place of worship and an outbreak of COVID happens? What happens if we are in some way involved or responsible for a local outbreak? So COVID anxiety is real for all of us in many ways. Some of the symptoms of anxiety, and again, I list these because I think often we feel these things, or these things are happening and we're not actually aware that they're happening, or why they're happening. But symptoms include trouble sleeping. Again, I've had so many people speak to me about their interrupted sleep patterns during this time. Over or under eating. In our house, it's certainly been overeating, unfortunately, which will be an issue we need to deal with. Digestive issues. A lot of people reporting, especially people with a tendency for things like irritable bowel or other things, have been really exacerbated during this time. Headaches, and I'm sure for a lot of us that is due to a huge amount of extra screen time than what we've been used to. Poor memory or difficulty concentrating for any period of time. Muscle tension. And that's just some of the physical symptoms. The psychological symptoms of anxiety, worrying, feeling irritable, feeling angry, feeling down, avoiding family or friends, loss of interest in work, possibly for some people a desire to be perfect or to do really well, and sometimes also an irrational fear of making mistakes. Now, I'm not saying that you'll be feeling all of those things and it may be a change from day to day, but again, take note of what has been happening in you and what you have been feeling. And remember that probably a lot of this is to do with the situation that's all around us at the moment. I want to mention burnout because I think it's important. I think even before COVID, statistics show that for folk in ministry, burnout is incredibly real and it's incredibly common. And I think the danger of seeing increased burnout amongst those in ministry as a result of COVID is very real. So a definition of burnout is to deplete oneself, to exhaust one's physical and mental resources, to wear oneself out by excessively striving to reach some unrealistic expectation imposed by oneself or by the values of society. And again, I want to be real. I think for a long time, ministers, that the expectations put on ministers, either by congregations or by sessions, by the central bodies, by yourselves at times, I think have been really unrealistic. And I feel incredibly sad about that. I think when I think and I hear about the pressures that people in ministry carry and the expectations that they carry. But again, even more so during this time, you have been expected to step up, to hold people, you know, maybe not physically, but emotionally and mentally, to provide safe spaces, to switch to online as much as you can, or to stay connected with people and to serve your communities and to serve the schools and all of these different things. And it's not realistic. In the midst of that, you've been dealing with your own losses, your own family pressures. For many of you, you've been dealing with extra family members at home or children out of school, or, I mean, this is exhausting stuff. And so burnout is real. And like I said earlier, whilst we recognize the adrenaline that can come, that adrenaline isn't, we cannot continue to live in a state of high adrenal stimulation. It's going to have to stop. Things I want you to remember about burnout is that you don't get there overnight. It happens slowly. And sometimes we don't realize it's happening to us because we don't stop and acknowledge what's happening in our bodies, in our minds, in our emotions, until we find ourselves almost beyond the point of no return. Okay, so it happens slowly. Research, and this is what I really want you to remember and take note of today. Research has shown that folk in leadership roles, including ministry, often experience burnout 18 months to 2 years after a significant or traumatic event. If you look at the research that came from America after 9/11, and there's huge, like so many stories about people in ministry at that time who really stepped up and showed incredible strength and leadership during that time. But the statistics of people that quit or burnt out or left ministry 18 to 2 months after are huge. A massive proportion of people did. Now, I'm not, obviously COVID and this pandemic is very different in many ways to 9/11, but it is a significant event, and for many it has been a traumatic event. And I think as a church, we need to recognize that if we don't look after ourselves now, and if we don't look after, for those of us who are responsible for looking after your ministry, if we don't take note of this and put things in place now, we will see the impact of this in 18 months to 2 years' time. Also, often the leaders who show, I've just said this, incredible adrenal level leadership, so the ones who are able to step up and really thrive under pressure, are the ones who burn out because they struggle to return to normal levels after a crisis. They struggle to then go from being on this high alert level of really stepping up to coming back down to, well, how do I start to take care of myself, and how do I start to operate without that same level of adrenaline driving me? Before we break out, again, a few things that I just want to say I think is really important about your leading in times like this and keeping yourself well is self-awareness, which we've been speaking about already, being aware of what's going on for you and in you. If you struggle to acknowledge that yourself, again, ask people who live with you, have you seen a change in me over the last few months? What are you noticing about me? I think that can be really important. And either having people to really listen to you, who give you opportunities to talk about what has changed for you, but also being able to provide that same kind of deep listening to the people who are alongside you. So your session members, maybe your session clerks, if you've got good relationships with them. Embracing the uncertainty. Okay, I think there is something about, and I'm sure Liz will talk more about this in the when she does her Zoominar in a few weeks' time. But learning to live with the unknown. I think there's been something exciting about, if I can use that word, about the fact that, or as a church, we have had to step into uncertainty. We've had to embrace it. We've had no option. And in many ways, we've probably, well, I would say we probably definitely have had to step into this uncertainty for many years, and we've been reluctant to do so because people like to hold on to what is known, even when it doesn't work or it's not fit for purpose anymore. But how do we continue to embrace this uncertainty when we're weary? And how do we continue to embrace uncertainty when we have congregations who are desperate? Or maybe it might be a 50-50 split, but I'm sure half of our congregations are desperate to get back to the way things were, and half are probably thinking this is an opportunity, let's do something different. We need to be aware of the systems and patterns around us that we're working within. I'm sure we're all too aware of sometimes the brokenness of the systems that we're working in and that we're a part of. But how do these systems impact on ourselves and our ministry and what we want to do? We need to be seeking diverse perspectives. So whose voice is not being heard in this? And again, I don't need to tell you that often it's the same people that we always hear from, the same people that speak up, maybe at a local level in our sessions. And it's hard sometimes not to listen to them because they're the ones doing all the talking. But who are we not hearing from? And we also need to be able to give ourselves permission to fail and experiment and do things differently. And I think that's important, because when our well-being is not good, it's really hard to give ourselves permission to fail and to experiment. When we're not feeling good about ourselves, experimenting becomes really, really difficult, and pleasing people or not upsetting people becomes a lot more important. So well-being is crucial to be able to continue to lead under this kind of pressure. This last slide before we go into another breakout. The aim of me kind of going over these things and these questions is not because I'm trying to teach you a set of tools, because again, you are all ministers and I'm not. You know much better about ministry than I do. But it's about how can I encourage you to grow your capacity to lead in challenging times. And for me, that's about how can I keep you well? How can I encourage you to keep yourselves well so that you can lead in these times? Because in times of significant challenge and rapid change, increasing capacity to lead in new and different ways is what is key. Okay, I don't feel that we need to teach any of you how to do ministry. I think you can all do ministry and you've all been doing that for a long time. But it's how do we help you and increase your capacity to lead during such challenging circumstances. So after asking all these, or telling you about all these slides just now, I want you to be now breaking out into rooms again and discussing these questions. What is happening in me right now? So this is different to well-being or different from rating yourselves in terms of how are you feeling about what's ahead in your ministry? Are you excited? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you desperate for things to change, or are you desperate for things to get back to where they were? What is happening in you right now when you think about the next 6-12 months? And the other thing I'd like you to discuss is, what do you need? What do you feel like you need to continue to minister during this time? So are folks happy to break out into rooms to discuss these questions? Be useful for folks to share if they want to, or anyone want to share if there were some common themes that came up in their groups. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that. And I think I've taken some notes of what people have written as well. But I think what has struck me by just the little that people have shared and said, again, is just the massive pressure that you are all carrying on all of those things, about the decisions needing to make about opening buildings or managing that, about your office bearers, about managing comparisons from congregation members about what other churches are doing, carrying your own grief about what you've lost in terms of what you were expecting, and then the grief of people in your congregations or communities, the feelings of not doing enough, the trepidation, the expectation to be creative and come up with more, having to live with more exposure. All of that is massive, absolutely huge. And we could spend hours looking at just a couple of these things and working out, well, how do we address those? I mean, we could. And I hope, what I want to say from my position as, I mean, there's a lot that needs to be spoken into this by people in other positions within the church. But for me, as the Pastoral Support Manager, what I want to say is, first and foremost, you need to look after yourselves. You need to be real about what is going on for you, about your sense of exhaustion, about your sense of trepidation. You need to remember that so much of ministry is invisible. People in your congregations do not see the pressures that you're carrying, the emotions that you're holding for people, the conversations that you have all day, every day. They think, you know, they only know or see what they experience of you. And again, the more exhausted you are, the more run down you are, the harder it is to manage those things, and the easier it is to buy into other people's expectations of you. And so I think for you to continue to be able to adapt and to lead during this time, and the reality is so much has to be reset. You know, things in the Church of Scotland needed to be reset before this, but so much is going to have to be reset going forward. We're not going to be able to return to the way things were. So it's going to take energy and creativity. There's going to be opposition. You know, we've all heard, I'm sure, the quote, if you're going to bring about change, expect sabotage. People will sabotage what you try and do. They will judge you, or they will compare you to other people who are doing things differently. I think to be equipped for that, you have to first be looking after yourself. I was glad to see a few people write up, what are people doing about holidays? I acknowledge that taking time off at the minute is incredibly difficult when you can't leave the manse, and so it doesn't feel like time off. But at the same time, you know, as ministers, that your 7 weeks or your 7 Sundays don't carry over, and I'm sure it'll be really hard once things do get back to normal to then take time off. So I think my encouragement to all of you is figure out how you can switch off at home, even though it's far from ideal. Even though you're still in the manse and you're still in the community, how you can be really clear to people, I'm taking this time off, I won't be answering my phone, I won't be available. And it's, again, I know it's easy for me to say that, but I think with all that you're carrying, if you are not taking time to look after yourselves now, the exhaustion will continue, the trepidation will continue. And I do think, I don't want to be a bearer of bad news, but I think that the more we progress down this route, the harder it's going to be, because there's more and more vagueness and greyness about expectations and how we open or what we do. One of the things I wanted to mention, one of the points was about communicating with elders. And I don't know if some of you may have signed up to the What's Next conversations that have been happening through the central church, through that Kay and Leslie Hamilton Messer have organised. Now, as part of those conversations, us facilitators have come up with a huge list of questions that we've been using in those groups. And when I have been speaking to ministers individually, I have been offering to send them a list of those questions if they would like to use some of them for conversations with their session members. So again, if anyone is interested in receiving those questions that we've been discussing with people in ministry to use as a tool to have some of these conversations with elders, please contact me and I'll be really happy to send you a list of those. I think a key is going to be working with sessions, obviously, and giving them space, like you're taking space to wrestle with some of these things, giving them space to wrestle alongside you. So please contact me if you would like a list of those questions. I'm aware that we've only got 10 minutes left, and there's so much that I would like to say about a lot of that, but I just want to, before we have to finish up, I'm just going to get my PowerPoint back up. I'll share my screen. Here we go. So from current slide, of people see that? Okay, yeah. We don't have time to break out for these questions, but one of the things I want you to think about are the unrealistic expectations that others are placing on you just now. And I think one of the ways to overcome them is to be real and to tackle them head on with yourself, so you can give yourself the safe talk that is unrealistic and I can't respond to that. Maybe talk to people that are close to you in your home, or a good friend or a mentor. What are the unrealistic expectations that others are placing on you just now? And what are the unrealistic expectations that you are placing on yourself? Now, I know that there'll be a mix of both. And again, I'm not saying this from any level of expertise, because I have been wrestling myself during this time with the expectations that I've put on myself to step up whilst having 2 kids under 4 in the house who make doing anything incredibly difficult. It's being real about your limitations. It's being real about your exhaustion. It's being real about what people or you are expecting of yourself, that it just is not manageable for the long term. Also encourage you to think about, do you feel like you have permission to experiment and to fail? I think in order to learn how to adapt to this new environment, we're going to have to try new things, and they're not all going to work, and people are not going to like everything that we do. And that doesn't mean that we failed when people don't like it, as you all know, but it can be hard to take. But do you feel like you have that permission? And if you don't feel like you have that permission, then how can you tackle that with your session, with your presbytery, with the clunkiness of the structures that you work within? And I guess lastly, I really want us to spend a little bit of time thinking about the support systems that you have in place. And you'll probably think, oh, here she goes again, banging on about ascend and support. But I really want you to know that there is support available to you. Now, a lot of the support that you might need or want might have nothing to do with what we can offer you centrally. And I do not think that we are the be all and end all of support, not by a long stretch of the imagination. But I want you all to know that there is pastoral support available to you. There is counselling scheme, there is pastoral supervision, there is coaching, there's the ministerial development conversations, there are bequest funds if you're in financial difficulty, if you're feeling stressed about money. These are some practical support things that are available. And if at any stage you want to engage in any of these and you want to find out more, please do get in touch with me about it. And I can speak to you about how you access these things. It's completely confidential, but they're there for you at any stage. And I think that going through this with all those questions that you raise, with working through those things, sometimes you need someone removed from your situation to be able to speak into those situations alongside you, especially when you're tired, especially when you're feeling trepidation, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed by what people are expecting of you. And pastoral support or pastoral supervision or coaching can be really useful in sustaining you through those times. And so please, if you would like to find out more information about that, please do get in touch with me or go on to Ascend. Before we finish, I would love to hear from you, and we won't go into breakout rooms because we don't have time, but if you have been thinking, do you know what, I wish Ascend would just do this or offer this kind of support, or I wish that we were getting more of these kind of updates or resources. If you have got things that practically you wish that I was doing or that Ascend was doing, I would absolutely love to hear it. And you know, I know that we are far from perfect, so I'm actually quite open to hear criticism as well. So if there's something that you have felt frustrated by, this is your opportunity to share it with me. So folk willing to give me any feedback about support or resources that would be useful.
Gabby.
Yes.
Brian, it's Ian Taylor. I don't know if you can.
Oh, hi, Ian. Yeah, there you are. I can see you now.
Hi, Gabby. Just picking up on what you said about burnout. I'm speaking as one of your Ascend pastoral supervisors, and one of the interesting things I'm now encountering is people are engaging in pastoral supervision, which is a success story for you, I suppose. But they're now getting to the point where they've reached their allowance for the year. And given that people are taking us up more and more on that, what can we do to continue to facilitate that ongoing provision?
Yeah.
And I say that as a pastoral supervisor, as one of your pastoral supervisors, on behalf of myself and at least one other pastoral supervisor who's encountering the same difficulty, one-to-one are saying to people now, you've spent your allowance, you can't get any more. At a time of pandemic, how do we fill that gap?
Yeah. So that if you have used your allowance towards pastoral supervision and you really want to continue with it, then please contact me, because like I said, we've got a number of bequest funds, well, a couple of bequest funds I apply to on your behalf. And what I can do, and I've done this in a few situations, and I'm happy to do with more, is I apply to the fund to provide the money to pay for pastoral supervision for the rest of the year. So if you're finding that supervision is really useful, you've finished your budget and cost is an issue, we will definitely, please contact me and we will work, I'll do my best to work something out.
Okay, thanks. I can convey that to those who have asked. Thanks.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else who wants to mention anything at the moment?
Just on that topic, Brian.
The world tour man who didn't put on weight, that's an interesting move.
It is indeed, yeah, and bank balance the same. We visited a variety of countries, one each day, and we went on YouTube to learn about them and then tried to cook a meal in the evening that came from the country. It was great fun. Anyway, it was just on that point, I experienced my final session of pastoral supervision that Edinburgh Presbytery provide for us, just as we were 3 weeks into it, and it was fantastic. And then the announcement came at the end that that's the last of your sessions. And so we went back to the presbytery who provide it for us and said to the presbytery, can we initiate some further support here in this area? And it's taken its time, but we've got there through the systems, you know, and got the financial support for that, so that the presbytery might be another avenue that we could, or you could explore the provision of additional pastoral supervision if that's going to be tricky at one-to-one in terms of demand.
Thanks, DC. Anyone else? No. Okay, Gabby.
Well, please do, like if there's things that you don't want to share publicly, but things that you're sitting on or come to mind, please do send me an email or give me a call and let me know what would be useful, because Ascend was created for you, and I don't have any agenda for Ascend out with wanting to support people in ministry. And if the things that we're doing do not feel supportive, if we're missing the mark, I would really, really love to hear from you about how we can be more effective in the way we offer support. And I know that we're limited by budget and all of these things as well, but at the same time, we do have resources, and I really want to make sure that we're channeling them in a way that is most accessible and most useful for all of you. So please do let me know if there's some feedback.